Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Today we have Aidan McCullen. Aidan is an Irish former professional rugby player. He's a transformational consultant and executive coach. He's also the host of the Innovation Show podcast. And today we will be speaking about his new book, Undisruptable, a mindset of permanent reinvention for individuals, organizations, and life. Aidan, thank you so much for joining me today.
A pleasure to be with you, Alan.
So your book is Undisruptable, but at the same time, you continue hammering that we have to change all the time. So I guess the idea on undisruptable is that we just cannot stop changing. And you changed your career. You were a professional rugby player, and now you are a consultant. You are executive coach. So that is an huge transformation. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background. First of all, as an Irish former rugby player.
Yeah, so like you, I'm a constant learner, and I'm sure you experience from your podcast. It's one of the best ways to learn, and I count myself really lucky, Alan. I've had several lives already, several kind of cycles to my life, and I guess I was always interested in transformation because I was that type of kid that was not picked on in the playground when the kids last picked. I was often that kid, or else they'd pick me on the other team, so they'd hope the other team would lose. So I wasn't the best athlete. I wasn't the best. I didn't have natural speed or innate ability. But somewhere along the way, I got it in my head that I wanted to play sport. And it didn't really matter what sport. I tried so many sports, and I eventually stumbled upon one that I wasn't last picked in. And it was, in a way, it was a transformation. So that transformation started at 16, where I got it in my head that I wanted to do this properly. I didn't intend to be a professional player, but I wanted to see what I could do. I didn't want to have regrets. So I trained hard. I trained harder than any of the very talented players that were with me, players who had played since they were children. I only started playing rugby when I was 13. I didn't have any background in the sport, and I transformed myself, my body, my mentality, and I was lucky that I got into the academy, which was the Irish Academy. And from there, went and played in France, played there when I was 21, and had an amazing career both in France and in Ireland with two of the most successful teams in European rugby. One is Leinster and the other one is Stade Toulousain in France, in Toulouse. Amazing experience. But the gift that rugby gives you, if you frame it that way, is that you have to retire at an age when you're either no longer picked, you're injured, or you don't get a contract again. So that happened for me, but I voluntarily went ahead. I was offered a 2-year contract when I was 31, but it was 2008, 2009, going into the financial downturn. And I saw an opportunity to get into a burgeoning field of digital advertising, digital marketing. And I guessed from my research, I used the experience of all the contacts I had from rugby to visit these agencies, and nobody really knew what digital was, digital advertising. And I was like, going, okay, well, the one thing rugby gave me was discipline and hard work, because as I mentioned, I wasn't that talented. I worked hard. So I always proclaimed to be a few Google searches ahead of everyone else in that field, but I was dedicated to those. So I did that for almost a decade, and I got really fascinated with the resistance to change. So why people resisted change in large organizations. And then I moved into innovation consultancy. So I worked as a head of innovation for the national broadcaster. And from that, really understood the resistance to change. And from there, then I realized that, and this is one of the core lessons from my book, is that you can't change business models until you change mental models. You can't change what people do until you change how they think, how they see the world. And often the job of an innovator or a consultant is to give people new information, as you do with your podcast, to change their view in some way, to give them information that they'll make different decisions. So I moved from an innovation consultant to organizational change, because that was the natural progress for me. So transformation is the red thread between everything I do, and it really drives me. One thing you said there was sport. Sport gives you these human skills that are now becoming very relevant in the world of automation and artificial intelligence. Leadership skills, communication, empathy, collaboration, all those things, and underpinned by discipline and hard work. So that's kind of a quick overview of the last 20 years of my life or so.
Okay, well, it's amazing. We in North America, we don't know that much about rugby, but I think it's a very popular sport in Europe. Now, my question is, so many leaders, they refuse to change because things have been working for a long time. You mentioned Nokia, and you mentioned many other organizations, and the reason why they are leading is because they are doing something that works. And if they are constantly changing, maybe they change too fast, maybe they don't get to collect the fruits of their labor. So how do they know when it's time to change?
So what I propose in the book is, with the speed of change that we're experiencing today, with artificial intelligence and technology underpinned by this term exponential change, which is essentially doublings, which is very hard for the human mind to comprehend. A way I propose to understand that is, if you think of 30 steps, you can quite figure out what that would be to walk 30 steps. That's linear thinking. While exponential steps, which are doublings, which is 2, 4, 8, 16, 30 exponential steps will bring you all the way to the moon and back again. So it's very counterintuitive, and that's underpinning so much of the change we're experiencing today. So that's one of the reasons why we need to change as organizations and those individuals who make up the organizations. So what I experienced, and this is both in sport, in every aspect of life, is that oftentimes we create a persona, whether that be, you running a dance hall studio, that becomes your identity. For many sports people, their identity becomes that sports person. When the rate of change is so fast, we need to let go of those personalities and the most important thing is be building new capabilities before we need them, because when we need them, it's often too late. So the reason that is if you think about the way the human mind reacts to crisis, what happens is the brain deflects blood from the frontal cortex, the intelligent part of your brain, if you will, the more advanced part, to your fists for fight and your feet for flight. So you make poor decisions in times of crisis. So these crises we're experiencing, like the pandemic, are going to happen more and more often. And in a way, the pandemic is a great warning shot across many of our bows in order to tell us you need to be building new capabilities, because when you need them, it's often too late, and you're left in this moment of crisis where you're not thinking straight. You'll grapple for the best possible solution, and often it's not the best one for you. So that's why. And then something you mentioned is really relevant, in that we climb to the top of a ladder, and whatever that might be, a career ladder, or as an organization like Nokia, I stumbled upon my killer product, the Nokia 3310. Many of our audience would have had those mobile phones. In 2007, Nokia, there was an article in Forbes magazine, front page cover, and it was 1 billion customers. Can anyone catch the cell phone king? That was November 2007. In January 2007, a very steep decline happened in the stock price of Nokia. And what happened was Nokia became obsessed with their success. And so much so that in 2004 or 2005, some engineers, some research and development executives came forth with this idea of, what about a touch screen phone? What about this tablet that we can use? What about this app store? And they were told to get out of the room, that the organization was making profit, that why would they deviate from success? And that tells so much behind so much of the disruption that we're experiencing. The same for individuals, Alain, because we get to the top of our career ladders and we start to defend. And when we defend, a part of our brain is cut off to allow in new information, and we don't spot threats. So we don't spot neither opportunities nor threats. And this is really counterintuitive for the world at the pace that it's moving. and the need to reinvent in permanence.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I invest in stocks, okay, and one of my biggest mistake is that I pull out too early. So I see something going up. Oh, it's going up. I'm going to sell it at a profit, and then I miss a huge overrun in the stocks. That's my. It's even a bigger mistake than holding on too long. So in regards to change, when are we pulling up too early? When are we looking for opportunities so much that we neglect to capitalize on the opportunity that we haven't had? You um, retired from rugby at a time, well, you were feeling the decline, but what if you have retired 5 years too early? You know, you will have missed all that nice glory and fame that you had at that time. So yeah, so there is the problem of pulling out too late or too early. How do we find out what's the, I don't know, the right time to start transforming ourselves?
So I think the best thing to do, like stocks aside, because the stock market, as you know, at the moment is crazy. So it's so hard to predict what's going to do well or not. But let's park the stocks for the moment, because that's a different, you know, the environment of stocks is so crazy. I heard recently that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk. By the way, if you haven't heard it, it's amazing. It's on YouTube, and they give such valuable advice. Now, there's a Chinese proverb, Alan, it's lovely. It says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is right now.
Right.
And I often think about that when you experience some type of crisis, whether it be redundancy or job loss or disruption in your industry, oftentimes you regret not making some changes, like planting the tree early. And this is what I propose in the book, is that many times when we're doing well, that's the time to reinvent. That's the time to add new capability. One of the heroes of Undisruptable and Undisruption I talk about is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he's an unusual one in many ways, because people don't know the full story behind him. And it reveals some amazing truths. And what happened was Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was 13, stumbled upon a magazine, and on the cover of that magazine was a guy called Reg Park, a guy who had become Mr. Universe and went on to be an actor in the movie Hercules. And Arnold had this vision plotted out for himself. Now, his father had different plans for him, wanted him to go to the army, and Arnold stuck to his vision. And he became the youngest ever Mr. Universe, behind none other than Reg Park, the guy that he had followed the vision after. But then he went to the US, and this is a really important fact. He went there, and knowing that there wasn't much money in bodybuilding at the time, it wasn't a professional sport as we know it today, he started to build capabilities before he needed them. So he started to take English lessons, he started to take acting lessons, he took lessons in business. He was also a very competent writer. So he wrote a book on bodybuilding that still hasn't been out of print to this very day. And he wrote for magazines. So he was constantly building these capabilities for his future vision of what he would become. And there was an interesting interview with him and with a journalist, where the journalist says, what's next for Arnold Schwarzenegger now that the bodybuilding career is over? And he proclaimed that he would become the highest paid actor of all time. And the journalist laughs at him. But the journalist didn't know that Arnold had planted the tree many years ago, and that he had been building these capabilities. He'd been understanding the acting industry, etc. And he stuck to his vision. And when he then became the highest paid actor of all time, in that period that he was the highest paid actor of all time, he did it again. So he went on another cycle of reinvention, and he started to take lessons in oration, public speaking, understanding politics, and he became the governor of California, and brought in huge reform and change in that role. And in that, what is often overlooked is the interim steps. If you think of them as cycles of change, as these rising cycles, in between each of the cycles is always messy. It's messy in the middle, as Brené Brown says. So to make it not so messy, you have to be building these capabilities. And sometimes the capabilities don't return financial return. Sometimes they return capability such as, for example, your podcast makes you better a curator of knowledge. It makes you connect dots differently between different episodes you've done. And you probably never predicted that when you started. But the fact is you started. And this is important, that people follow those inklings of what's interesting to me, what am I curious about? Because oftentimes they deliver these capabilities that become so useful at a later stage in life. And the same thing, Alan, goes for organizations, that they need to be experimenting. They need to be looking at trends. What's changing in the environment? What are my customers asking for that I don't offer them right now? Because there's always patterns in chaos. And if you can look at the patterns, you can inform yourself as to where things are going, or roughly going. You're not going to always get it right, as you know from your stock market. You're not going to always get it right, but you can inform yourself as much as possible.
I know that we have a time limit. Let me ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, behind me, Alan, you can see I always point, when I talk about the innovation show, I always put my head backwards like that and point to the books behind me. And they are the brilliant guests I have on every week. I interview an author every week. I read their book, take notes, and edit it. And oftentimes, particularly the early books on innovation, I found very academic, not so pleasant to read, and I didn't even like the style of the book, etc. And I became fascinated by trying to articulate complex ideas in simple ways. So how could I translate that for a wider audience that could make use of that? I also lecture in Trinity College here in Dublin, in Ireland, and one of the things about that is, when you can connect with the students who are MBA students, like they're 25 to 50, when you can connect really complex ideas in simple ways, you can see how empowered they feel. And I wanted to write a book that would do the same thing. I wanted to write a book that would inspire people to chase their visions like Arnold Schwarzenegger did, in spite of the many obstacles and the setbacks that we encounter when we do that. Because one of the things I say is that when you encounter change, whether it be a fear of becoming something new yourself individually, or an organization being fear of disrupting themselves or cannibalizing their business model, you will encounter change, but see it as a milestone. Don't see it as a millstone hanging around your neck, because if you reframe change that way, you can make unbelievable progress. And I think of life, Alan, as an odyssey, not a journey, because a journey has a destination. An odyssey is about the joy of the voyage. It's about, I don't know what's coming. So I want to be trying new things. I don't want to be sitting on my deathbed and going, I wish I tried that. I wish I did that. And I wanted to write a book that would do the same for others, to inspire them to chase their dreams so they have no regrets and they can try on multiple lives in the life that we have.
Well, there's a lot of to unpack in this book. We didn't even get to, there's so much we didn't get to. I wonder if you could just tell us one more time the title of the book, and also could you tell us about your podcast as well?
With pleasure. So the book is called Undisruptable, and it's kind of an ironic title in a way. I did it for a couple of reasons, Alan. One was the word didn't exist. It didn't exist in Amazon. There's another book now coming out after it called Undisruptable as well. But at the time it didn't exist. And I was like, that's an opportunity from a keyword perspective if you type it into Amazon or Google. But it's the tagline that's really important. So I talk about this mindset of permanent reinvention. And I say that goes for organizations, individuals, and life, because they're all the same. Organizations are made up of individuals, and life encompasses all those different things. So if you have this mindset of reinvention, of trying new things, of understanding that with invention, failure is part of it, it's symbiotic, it's part of any change. And that we realize that there's always assets in the ashes of change. When we try something new and it doesn't work out the way we wanted it to, it's not a failure. It's only a failure if we don't gather what is useful from that experience and build ourselves up again. And that's the real essence and drive behind the book. I bring people on a journey of metaphors and analogies and personal experience to bring it to life. And I hope it's really helpful. And then the innovation show, as I mentioned, I have the privilege of, like you, interviewing amazing people every week, talking about their book, diving into it deeply, and distilling that knowledge and sharing it out to the world. And there's a saying that I love that I tie to the innovation show. It's by an author called Edith Wharton. And she said there's two ways to spread the light. One is to be the candle and the other is to be the mirror. And in a way, the innovation show is a mirror of all these lights that are out there sharing their information. And then the next logical step for me was to write a book. And I hope that in some way is a candle and that can light up the world in some way.
Well, Aidan, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, Alan.